This topic seems to be in the headlines almost every day. So it's something that I know that I'm paying attention to, and probably many of your listeners are too. I think community pharmacists practicing the compounding of GLP-1s really need to be very well versed in these regulatory requirements and the changing landscape. During the times of commercial drug shortage, when we couldn't get the brand name products, that's when the 503B facilities were allowed to compound the GLP-1s. And then in some states, the 503A pharmacies were also able to dispense those doses to their patients as patient-specific doses. But the shortage has been resolved for the better part of a year now. And so the 503B outsourcing facilities are not able to compound those anymore. However, 503A pharmacies may continue to compound those patient-specific doses, again, pursuant to a prescription or, in reasonable quantities in anticipation in reasonable quantities in anticipation. Oh, wow. Let me go back there. Since the shortage has been resolved, 503A pharmacies may continue to compound those patient specific doses pursuant to a prescription or in reasonable quantities in anticipation of a prescription. Now, of course, we have to follow those USP 797 requirements and batch limitations. And so, for community pharmacists that are performing GLP-1 compounding, they really need to be prepared to kind of justify their rationale for their anticipatory batch quantities to really avoid the impression of mass production. I think that's where the FDA is really kind of targeting in on some of their quantities. Um, and then for community pharmacists that are not actually involved in compounding, maybe patients are coming to you with questions, and so just being able to help them navigate, what those differences are, where products can come from. Most of the patients, I think, are also having those conversations with their providers. So it's really a provider, patient, and pharmacist kind of conversation to navigate. And most compounding pharmacies kind of are used to navigating these conversations, and focusing again on that where compounding pharmacy really fits is to meet a patient need. And so those involved in compounding are kind of used to navigating the conversations about safety and efficacy. So while we cannot claim that they're, a similarity to a reference product, we can speak to the safety of the compounding process, the training of our personnel, and really the reliance on evidence-based literature to support our formulations and quality management processes. So focus on your team's abilities and your processes, and go from there. This is definitely an important issue to talk about, and there's lots of steps involved. So, supplier qualification and ingredient verification are really critical steps in the process. And I like to think that compounding actually begins at the loading dock, or maybe even further before the loading dock by evaluating the vendors in the supply chain, such as manufacturers, distributors, and repackagers. There's a lot of different ways that product can come into the market. And so it does take some persistence to determine the actual source of the API, confirm the quality standards that vendor adheres to. And so that includes, sourcing API from FDA registered facilities, really carefully reviewing the certificate of analysis that comes with each lot number, and then referencing a USP or NF monograph as a comparison. And so you really need to understand what each of those steps are to make sure that when each product comes in, that you are kind of qualifying it against the reference. Um, One thing that we should not be doing, legitimate compounding pharmacies really should never be compounding with anything that is labeled for research purposes or not for human use. That's really those things that are coming in through the gray market that shouldn't be making their way into our pharmacies. Now, we know that they're out there in the world, but they shouldn't be here in our pharmacies. And the FDA has some good guidance on for compounders on how to know your bulks and excipient suppliers. And so those are a good place to start by just looking through some of those things. But then again, doing your due diligence at each step of the supply chain. First, I would say read those warning letters and learn from them what not to do. There's some very specific examples of language that the FDA saw on particular websites or things in their marketing to point out and say, we don't want you to do this. So that's very helpful. Learn from those that have already made those mistakes. And then what you can do, again, you can promote the experience of your personnel, about what training they have. You can talk about the qualifications of your pharmacy, your room, like your 797 or 800 room. Maybe patients aren't going to understand what that means, but if they have um, people that are helping them, like pharmacists or providers and their family, maybe that are looking, they might have a little like clue into that. Then, if you have any accreditation, such as PCAB, or if you're a part of the NABP Verified Pharmacy Program, one of the things I tell patients and friends and family is you have a right to know who your pharmacy is, where you're getting this medication from, and showing some of those accreditations or quality standards should be a boost of confidence. So, and be proud of them because you worked really hard to get them. Some other things that you can do on your website or other marketing is also be very clear that you require a prescription for any doses or any services that you provide, because this is 503A patient specific compounding, and so that just need to be clear about that. People can't just come and see a list of services, a menu on your site, and say, "Well, I want that GLP-1 or I want that thyroid medication." That it really is, again, going back to your provider. And so you could discuss going back to your provider to get that prescription. Um, and then I think just in general, having some description about the purpose and benefits of compounded medications, about the compounding process, not revealing all about how the sausage is made necessarily, but um, kind of why we do what we do. And the compounding meets a patient need when it can't be met in the market else otherwise. And whether that's, because there's an allergy to a particular ingredient or a dosage form that is not available in the market, or some um, just doses that are not available. So there's, you can kind of talk about those benefits in general. I think that this isn't unique to GLP-1s, that the cost of medications are a reality for medicines across the board, for patients across the board. So it's really our job as pharmacists, whether you're at the corner drugstore or you're in the hospital or home infusion, whatever your practice setting is, to understand the options for your patients, because you're ultimately there to serve your patient, right? So this may include, checking for insurance coverage, supporting prior authorization, suggesting a therapeutic alternative. Many times the insurance formularies navigate those things for us, but also for these GLP-1s, many patients are just foregoing insurance altogether because it's not often covered. So what are the other options there? And so that's where maybe pharmacy discount cards can be applied, or again, referring to a legitimate compounding pharmacy. So if and you're at your corner drugstore and you're not doing compounding, maybe building relationships with those compounding pharmacies in your area, or looking them up on legitimate services like the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding or your state board of pharmacy website, so that you can again help patients navigate and get to the right place in a quality location. Um, and then I think, regardless of how the patient obtains a GLP-1, it's important to talk about safe medication use, disposal practices. These are sharps. So you need to have, you can help supply them with sharps containers or alcohol wipes, right injection technique, certainly management of side effects, and ensuring that they get appropriate follow up. And just making sure that patients feel comfortable talking to you and trusting you with that medication. If they're getting it from somewhere outside of your pharmacy information system, it needs to be added so that it can also be flagged for your adverse drug reaction alerts, your drug interactions, things like that. You need to have that as part of your whole patient management profile.